Hey guys, let's say you were going first in a game of Scrabble, and you were lucky enough to draw the word chicken as an opening bingo on your first turn. Would you score 96 points, the most you can possibly get, by playing chicken over here? I think the vast majority of us would be too chicken to play chicken right here, because it stops one square before a triple word score. The risk here is that if your opponent has one of the 4 S's or even one of the 2 blanks, they're going to score a ton of points by playing a word hooking an S on chicken to make chickens, getting the triple word score both ways. So most people would probably play chicken somewhere else, maybe over here. This scores 94 points, which is 2 less than the 96 point placement we just looked at, but it doesn't have the same risk, since it doesn't stop one square before a triple word score. However, not all of us would necessarily be too chicken to play chicken for 96. And one notable person I'm thinking of is none other than 2023 North American Scrabble champion Josh Sokol. Josh has shown time and again throughout his Scrabble career a willingness to make these kind of risky plays, despite it going against traditional Scrabble wisdom and probably going against what basically every other top Scrabble player would do. However, as Josh knows better than everybody, while there is a lot of risk to making these kind of plays, there's also a lot of potential reward, and at the minimum, they create a lot of chaos and a lot of good content, which I know Josh really enjoys doing. So with that in mind, let's jump into a compilation of some of the most wild and risky opening plays ever made by Josh Sokol in a Scrabble tournament. We're going to go 10 years back to the 2014 National Scrabble Championships for our first example. This game featured Josh taking on longtime Thai expert Amnue, and Josh's opening rack is ILRTTU blank. What most people would consider the best play here is probably something like Ruddly for 64 points, getting an early lead and not really giving a whole lot of counterplay. But that is not what Josh did. Josh played Titular for 64, scoring the same amount, but stopping one before the triple word score. Note that titular not only takes an S, it also takes a Y for titulary. So if Amnui has any of the 4 S's or 2 Y's, he has potential to score a huge number of points on his next turn. But, Josh might argue, what happens if Amnui doesn't have any of those tiles? Well, as it turns out, he didn't, because he responded with Edic for 12. And guess what? Josh now drew an S and plunked down a Herds for 60 points, going up by over 100 on just turn 2. It's worth mentioning if Josh wanted to be really greedy, he could actually play Hexed for 46 here, holding onto his S for one more turn, hoping that if Amnue once again didn't have an S or a Y, Josh may be able to score well here and then score well again, maybe even bingo with titulars on his next turn. However, there's a limit to greed even for Josh Sokol, and he decided, probably smartly, to play for 60 here. So did this gamble end up paying off for Josh in the end? It did. When all is said and done, Josh ended up winning this game by 120 points. Now, let's fast forward a couple months to the end of 2014, where at the annual Albany, New York New Year's tournament, Josh was taking on longtime expert Richard Popper. And with an opening rack of AGIINS blank, Josh has a plethora of opening bingos. His highest scoring ones score 68, placing the G on the double letter score something like a rising. However, that is not what Josh did. He still had the sweet taste in his mouth from his victory against Amnue we just looked at a couple months ago, where he opened with a bingo, stopping one before a triple word score. And that's exactly what he does to Richard here, playing Sailing for 66 points. He actually sacrifices 2 points here over a Rising to take this risk. It's worth mentioning that Sailing actually takes it back S for Sailings. This might not be obvious to everybody, and part of the risk here is that Josh, feeling he's the better player, may be hoping that Richard doesn't know the Sailings hook or is not sure of it and afraid to risk losing his turn on it. Let's see if this gamble paid off. Richard did not use the Sailings hook, responding with Gun for 12, and Josh drew badly here, pulling BJWX and, most importantly, not an S. He plays Jinx for 27, hoping that maybe he can get an S on his next turn. Richard once again doesn't use the Sailings hook, dumping his Q for 22. Josh still doesn't have an S and plays Brew for 27 points. Richard exchanges 3 tiles. And now note that Josh has accumulated a fairly large lead already. He's up by 86 points and he has drawn a blank. so he can compound his lead further by playing something like hunts or herds, which would score over 50 points and take out the sailings hook. However, here, Josh decides to get very greedy. He plays unused for just 7 points, holding his blank and hoping he can maybe get a bingo with sailings on his next turn. Of course, the risk here is that Richard by now has an S and ends up playing sailings himself, crushing all of Josh's hopes and dreams. Does that happen? No. Richard plays AE for 10 points, trying to open up some more space on the top of the board, and Josh does hit. With EHIRTV blank, he slaps down Thrives and Sailings for a whopping 110 points, which will bring the score to 237 to 44. And Richard, I think appropriately after this play came down, said, "I can't believe you made that play." When all was said and done, Josh would go on to win this game by a pretty convincing margin, 547 to 304. So we've now seen Josh use this risky opening tactic twice to great success both times. Would it continue to be so successful? Let's see. We've got to move forward a couple of years to the 2017 Nationals to find our next example for this video. In the final game of that tournament, round 31, Josh was taking on fellow top expert Cesar del Solar. And with an opening rack of AEILRTT, Josh has the 7-letter bingo available of tertial. Most people would probably play it somewhere like over here, or maybe over here. But as we surely know by now, Josh is not like most people. Josh plays tertial with the first T on the star over here. Now, in case you're wondering, yes, tertial does take an S, and this is of course extremely risky because Cesar could have an S and play something with tertials for a huge number of points. But a couple of things. Number one, remember, as we've seen in this video, Josh is on a 2-game streak of this tactic working really well. And also, as he points out in his commentary, this was the final game of Nationals, he was out of contention for a cash prize, so he didn't really care at this point and he wanted to have some fun. Cesar was not so amused, writing, "This is the most trollish move in the world." Let's see which of these guys ended up having the last laugh. This time, for the first time in history, Josh's opponent has an S. And not only does Josh's opponent have an S, Josh's opponent has a bingo. Lawyers comes down immediately from Cesar for 125, and just like that, Josh is down 60 points when if he had played tertial in a more traditional spot, it would have been a pretty close game. Fast forward a couple turns, and Josh has bingoed with bovines to get back within 3 points. Cesar here makes the play of 1 for 13 points, which he admits is probably not the greatest play. He should be a little bit more aggressive and play Odeon for 19 points, which does set up a big S-hook, but scores 6 more and keeps a better lead. His excuse in his commentary is that he was already steaming from the way this game was going, and that affected his play. Josh's response in the commentary, though, I think is even funnier. He writes, "I knew this was a bad play, and I was getting great pleasure and confidence from it." Well, would it be enough pleasure and confidence for Josh to complete this comeback? Fast forward a couple more turns, and Cesar faces a pivotal decision on this turn. He can grab some points with a play like Geoid, but he decides instead to fish with Obe for 10, holding a really strong bingo lead. This backfires spectacularly, as it gives Josh a 95-point spot for his previously unplayable bingo of Corrida, which catapults Josh into a lead of over 100 points. To make matters worse for Cesar, he misses his bingo fish and Josh draws a blank. In the end, when all was said and done, Josh would win this game 514 to 464. So, if you guys are keeping track, Josh is now 3 for 3 in games where he opens with a bingo 1 short of the triple word. Is he onto something here? His opponent in the next game we're going to look at, fellow top expert Ben Schoenbrunn, is certainly going to have something to say about that. Josh, on his opening play here, has NNOTUVZ. And you might be thinking, wait a minute, Josh has opened with a bingo in all of these games. He doesn't have a bingo with that. What's going on? Well, Josh exchanges 4 tiles here, and Ben exchanges 4 back. And now, with AENOOTZ, Josh actually has 2 playable 7-letter words on this rack, Ozonate and Entozoa. Both of them can play for 102. He can play Ozonate over here, or he can play Entozoa in the spot he ultimately did over here. Now, the ironic thing about this play is that it's very risky, and Josh didn't realize it. Josh actually played Entozoa under the mistaken impression that it didn't take any backhooks. It's worth mentioning that Entozoa is a plural of entozoon. So entozoa definitely doesn't take an S as it's already a plural. However, Josh forgot that entozoa takes not only an L for entozoal, but also an N for entozoan. So his idea here was that he was actually hoping Ben would put a tile on the back of entozoa, and then Josh was going to challenge, and Ben's play was going to come off the board, and Josh was going to get a free turn. Did that plan work out? Not too well, because on the very next turn, Ben slaps down Snouty and entozoan for 90 points. And according to plan, Josh immediately challenges this, thinking once again that entozoa doesn't take any back hooks. Josh loses his turn as a result of the bad challenge. Ben capitalizes on his free turn immediately and effectively with an 88-point bingo through the Z of Topazine, taking a 76-point lead. And now things went from bad to worse for Josh. He plays Flams for 68 points, which at first looks great, cutting significantly into Ben's lead. However, there is a big problem. Topazine is not a noun, it's an adjective meaning pertaining to topaz, and Ben was aware of this. So Ben now challenges Josh's play off the board, and Josh scores 0, losing a second consecutive turn. Josh's comment here is so funny. Why does your Z word have no hooks? Why can't mine have no hooks? In any case, Josh was not able to recover from these 2 consecutive lost turns, and when all was said and done, Ben won the game by a score of 495 to 438. So, Josh's greed finally catches up to him, and at last he loses a game where he opens with a bingo that takes a hook, one before a triple word score. But was this experience going to stop him from doing it again? Absolutely not. Because soon after his debacle against Ben, Josh found himself in this position with an opening rack of DEEILRV against another longtime expert, Ronald Howard. And there are several available bingos here that one could play, such as Relived, which would score 80 points, and while it does stop one before a triple, it's perfectly safe because Relived is already a past tense of relive. This doesn't take any back hooks. Josh, though, had other ideas. As he points out, he had been going through a rough stretch this tournament. 6 of his recent opponents had just opened with bingos against Josh, and Josh was getting a little bit tired of his bad luck, so he decided to go back to his trusty old ways and open with Deliver with the D on the star. Now, Deliver takes not only an S, as alert viewers will note, but also a Y for delivery. So if Ronald has any of the 4 S's or the 2 Y's, or possibly the 2 blanks, he's going to score a lot of points. And it turns out that Ronald does. He has the blank and he plays XIS for 60 points. Honestly, all things considered, this is probably a pretty good outcome for Josh. 60 is not all that much for plays on the bottom row in the scheme of things, and Ronald also had to use his blank to take out this spot. So after this play, Ronald's blank is gone and Josh is still up 20 points. A pretty decent result, all things considered, even though this gamble for Josh didn't technically pay off. Despite a really nice bingo by Ronald of Bikeways for 108 points a bit later in the game, Josh would hold on to win 512 to 389. So Josh is back to his winning ways when opening with a risky bingo. Could he keep it up? A little bit later, in round 1 of a Toronto tournament against expert player Bryn Bowen, Josh had the word otalgia on his opening rack of AAGILOT. Most people would probably play it for 68 in a spot like this one. But as we've seen so many times, Josh is not like most people. He plays it for 70 with the O on the start, stopping one before the triple word score and setting up potentially mammoth plays with otalgias if Bryn has an S. Now, it's worth mentioning, once again, this was round 1 of this tournament. In a couple of the other situations, we've seen that Josh either has nothing to play for because he's out of contention, or maybe he's a little bit upset from how the tournament's going, and he plays this as a bit of a reaction to that. But with this being round 1, Josh is playing this with nothing to go off of. So it's really interesting to see Josh is not reacting to anything. He's not frustrated here. He is just starting with this tactic right out of the gate, saying, Bryn, if you have an S, you have an S. If you don't, let's see what you got. And Bryn makes a very interesting play here. He presumably doesn't have an S and plays Onyx for 26 points, completely crippling the S hook. There are a total of 0 words in the entire Scrabble dictionary that have SX next to each other at any point in the word. So that means it is now impossible for otalgias to ever get used. So this is the first instance we've seen Josh make this kind of play where the hook is never going to get used throughout the whole game. Amazingly, Josh would go on to win this game by a huge margin despite being unable to capitalize on his hook. When the game was finished, Josh won by 250, 548 to 298 being the final score, once again despite never using the otalgias hook he set up. A few months later, Josh was facing another strong player, Sean Abbasi, and Josh, as he has done so many times, didn't play his opening bingo of Anurin in a spot like this. That's too boring for Josh. He played Anurin over here, one short of the triple, and Sean did not have an S, at least not yet. He responds with hover for 22 points. So was Josh able to get an S and capitalize himself? No, he was not. And here, Josh decides to actually, for once, play a little bit safe. His highest scoring play by far is Taj for 43, which leaves the Anurin's hook completely open. But Josh sacrifices 13 points to play Junta for 30, which at least partially stops plays with Anurins. However, it doesn't stop them entirely, as Sean perfectly demonstrated on his next play, because he has now drawn an S and plays Sohn for 52 points. Josh is still up a little bit, despite Sean hitting the spot though, and Josh would indeed go on to win the game yet again, this time by a final score of 482 to 407. Josh, if you guys are keeping track, is now 6-1 through the first 7 examples we've looked at of him using this tactic. He only lost the one game to Ben where he didn't actually realize his opening bingo took a hook. Would he keep winning? Well, this is the last example I have for this video, guys, so if Josh is going to be stopped, it'll be up to fellow expert and my good friend Sid Morali to do it. And Josh is going to, of course, open with a bingo. He's got 3 of them: Dreamer, Redream, and Rearmed. If he wants to score 76 points, the most sensible way to do it looks to be to play Redream over here, or Rearmed over here, which does stop one before a triple, but Rearmed doesn't take any hooks. Instead, Josh plays Dreamer for 76, stopping one before a triple word score. This, of course, sets up a massive Dreamer's hook that Sid might have. Or maybe Sid won't have it, and Josh will get it and build a huge lead very early on. But Sid does have it, and plays Cants for 63 points, almost immediately neutralizing Josh's lead. However, Josh draws CENOPTW after his play of Dreamers. And CPW don't seem like the best bingo tiles, but he has 2 pence for 86 points available to the second E in Dreamers. However, Josh misses it. He plays POW for 29 points, a huge break for Sid. However, when all was said and done, Josh would end up holding on narrowly, winning the game 397 to 371, despite his rashness on his opening play and his costly miss of 2 pence on turn 2. So, in the 8 games I have of Josh doing this, these are the only 8 Josh was able to recall. They may be the only 8 ever. Josh has gone 7-1. So maybe, just maybe, is Josh onto something with this strategy. Before I close out this video though, guys, I want to include one more epic Josh Sokol opening play as a bonus. Now, the reason I have this weird screen up here is I want to show you guys what happens when I try to import this game into the Woogle's game viewer. If I hit Create New Game after uploading the game file, it gives me the following very strange error message. Your play must include at least 2 letters. Well, duh! We all know, or probably should know, that 1 or 0 letter words are not valid in Scrabble, so of course your play has to include at least 2 letters. Wait a minute. There was a play in this game that didn't include at least 2 letters? Huh? Since Woogles won't allow me to view this game, we'll instead look at it on the crosstables.com annotated game viewer. Josh was playing, once again, Cesar del Solar, and had an opening rack of AAEILNT. Now, there are no valid bingos here, so Josh did not open with a bingo, stopping one short of the triple. Instead, Josh opened with A for 2. Huh? Didn't we just say that one-tile plays are not allowed in Scrabble? Well, yes, they're not allowed, but technically a one-tile play is a phony. There are no one-letter words in the Scrabble dictionary. That doesn't mean you're not allowed to put a one-letter word down on your opening play. It just means that it's a phony. It's technically the same thing as if you missed the central star on your opening play. There have been instances where players somehow have made plays that don't cover the center star. Those are basically phonies. Your opponent can just challenge them off as if they were non-words, even if they're valid words. Note that they do not have to challenge them off. It's the same thing here with Josh's one-tile play of A. Cesar could challenge this off, and in most cases he probably should, but if for some reason this A gives him a good play he wouldn't have without it, he might elect to let this stay on the board for 2 points. Cesar, in this position, did decide to challenge it off the board, and he had an opening rack of AADEMRU. Now, in this position, Cesar might normally play something like Maraud for 24 points, keeping an E on his rack. However, he makes a very smart play. He trades 2, trading AU, keeping the strong ADERM leave. Now, why not Maraud? Well, Josh's play of A is obviously very strange, and Cesar correctly figured that with this play, Josh was hoping that Cesar would challenge it off and then give Josh a tile he could use for an 8-letter bingo. Josh doesn't have any 7-letter bingos with this rack of AAEILNT, but he's very close to 8-letter bingos. For instance, Cesar's play of Maraud hypothetically would have given Josh a 70-point response of Laminate. So, a very good decision by Cesar there to exchange. And here, Josh decides that Cesar now, after his trade 2, is on to Josh. Cesar presumably realizes what Josh is up to, so Josh now doesn't play A again, he exchanges an A, as would have been the more, shall we say, traditional move for him to make on his first turn. Now, this game went on, and eventually Cesar ended up winning narrowly by a score of 395 to 369, so you could say that Josh's shenanigans with opening with a one-tile play did not pay off. That being said, it's a pretty funny idea, and I could definitely see it throwing some people off, so maybe something to keep in mind. Next time you have a rack that's close to a bunch of 8-letter bingos, if you could just get one tile but doesn't make any 7-letter bingos, maybe consider playing your one slightly troublesome tile on the star as a one-tile play. Remember, it doesn't have to be A. Even though A is actually a word in English, even though it's not in the Scrabble dictionary, you could technically open with anything else. You could open with O, you could even open with Q. All of these plays are phony, so your opponent would have the option to challenge it off in all of these cases, but maybe, if they're not careful, or they're just confused or don't really see what you're doing, they would challenge it off and give you the letter for a bingo. I don't really recommend this in most situations, especially if you're playing against a good player who'll probably catch on to you, but it's still very interesting to think about. Same thing with Josh's plays bingoing one short of a triple. In most cases, I personally don't recommend playing like that, but Josh did go 7-1 in the examples we looked at where he did make those kind of plays, so there may be something to it. Again, personally, it's not the way I like to play, and it's not the way most people at the top level like to play, but it's something to think about. In any case, that's about all I have for this one, guys. Really hope you enjoyed it and got a kick out of this video, and maybe it did give you something to think about. Let me know what you think in the comment section about Josh's opening plays here. Thanks so much for watching. Really appreciate your support, and I'll see you all soon for the next video. Take care. Bye-bye.